Pillow talks taxes. He has been for over 45 years, and there's not a human on the planet with more experience solving problems on behalf of taxpayers. He wants to solve your problem whether you know you have one or not. So if you do have a tax problem, get a hold of his office or visit his website. If you don't have a tax problem, your current tax problem is taxes themselves. Let's get into the policy issues of today. The main one is the government is still shut down, which means there's no IRS, which means there's no taxes to be paid. The deadline yesterday was superfluous and nobody had to pay their taxes on time.
That's not exactly right. I think we would wish that were true. If the government's going to go away, let's let it go away. But that's not at all the case. The IRS made it clear early on in the shutdown that the filing deadlines are not extended. The payment deadlines are not extended. If you were on an extension to file your tax return until April 15th, which is just passed now, if you didn't do it, you need to take some action. If your tax return is late, you're charged with a failure to file penalty, which is 5% of the tax owed for any part of a month. The return is late. It could be late for 1 day. It could be late for 30 days. Any part of a month that it's late, it's 5%, a maximum of 5 months or 25% penalty. So you need to get that return filed if you didn't already do. Just because the government's shut down does not mean that you should not or cannot file your tax returns, particularly if you're e-filing the returns through a tax professional. The IRS has maintained some operating staff. We talked about this last time on the podcast. About half of their employees, just under 40,000, are still working. They are manning what the IRS calls essential IRS functions. One of those essential functions is keeping their e-filing system operating, as well as keeping the e-payment system operating. So if you owe taxes to the IRS, you're not forgiven of those taxes just because the government's shut down. Like your cell phone provider goes down for 3 or 4 days, you get a credit on your bill because you didn't have any phone for a couple of days. Not true with the federal government. They're shut down.
I propose an immediate resolution that if the government is shut down, not only do you get a tax deduction based on the percentage of the time that the government was shut down, but also all of the sitting Congress people are ineligible for re-election. That's what I think.
Certainly should be ineligible for their pay. There's no question about that. But we don't have a functioning Congress right now, Josh. We've got two diametrically opposed ideologies that are fighting each other at every step. One of the best examples of that is the president's nomination for the position of IRS Chief Counsel. The position of IRS Chief Counsel is the head lawyer in the Internal Revenue Service. The guy nominated to be in that position right now is a guy named Donald Cole, and he is a long-time IRS person. He's functioned as acting chief counsel for a period of time. The guy knows the ins and outs of the Internal Revenue Service. He knows how to run the lawyer staff at the IRS, and he is a guy for the job. There's no doubt about that. But the fact of the matter is, every single Democrat on the Senate Finance Committee, with no exceptions, voted against him simply because he is the president's nominee. All right, so this is the kind of thing that's going on in Washington right now. It doesn't make any difference who the nominees are. It doesn't make any difference what qualifications are. It doesn't make any difference what their background is. Those people are going to vote against the president's nominee. In the meantime, of course, the Democrats have their feet dug in on this question of additional funding. But let's get back to the IRS thing here. Now, I want to be perfectly clear about this. One of the essential operations that the IRS has determined it's going to continue to staff is its e-filing systems and its e-payment systems. If you send mail to the IRS, if you send a check in the mail, they have staff there that will open those envelopes and process those checks and get the checks cashed and your payment posted. So it's not just going to sit in an envelope. Even under the best of circumstances, I do not recommend that you send a check to the IRS. This is particularly important if you are paying back tax liabilities for a specific year. When you pay a specific back tax liability for a particular year, you have the right to designate your payment. Let's say you owe for 5 tax years and you want to pay off tax year X for whatever reason. If you just send a check to the IRS, they will apply that payment in a manner that's in the best interest of the government. Generally speaking, they put it to the oldest year, then and taxes for that year, and then penalties and interest. However, you as a citizen have the right to designate the payment to whatever tax year you want. You don't have to pay off the oldest year first. And I do this a lot of times, Josh, when I've got clients that have very old tax liabilities that are about to expire because of the collection statute of limitations. So if we got a tax debt, let's say for 2012 of $10,000, and the client also owes a tax debt of, let's say, $10,000 for 2020, 2022. I want him to pay the 2022 tax. I don't want him to pay the old tax, because as long as that liability, as long as the clock is ticking, that liability, that old tax liability could just run out. If you just send a check to the IRS, they're going to put it to the oldest year. So if you use their online direct pay system, you can designate that payment to whatever year you want it to go to, and they will apply it in that manner. Under the best of circumstances, I don't advise people send a check to the IRS anyway. But that said,
I was one of those people who had their tax return on the filing extension to October 15th, which means I had to pay my taxes yesterday, which means I waited until the last minute to pay my taxes yesterday. However, I will tell you, it was so easy to navigate through their payment system, and I had my moral support, aka my older sister, who does my taxes. Shout out Kinsey, who is your protege.
She is enrolled to practice before the IRS. She's not an attorney, so she can't work in court on behalf of people, but she is my right arm when it comes to helping our clients litigate their problems, and she does our tax return preparation here in this office, including yours and your brother.
And she was on the phone with me as I was navigating it, but I didn't need any of her help. If I can figure it out, then it's certainly easy enough for the common man.
I can figure it out, and I'm not a computer guy. I'll tell you, there's not a lot of things that are right with the IRS, but this online payment system is one of the things that is right. They got that set up and it works great. You go to their website, irs.gov, you click on the pay tab in the upper left corner of the home page, and you go to the direct pay system. You can use either a bank account, which works like direct debit, or a credit card. If you use a credit card, they charge you a 3 or 4% convenience fee. They're not paying the credit card fees. You're paying the credit card fees. So you got to be careful about that. But if you use your bank account to make the payment, that money comes right out of the account, just like a debit card, no fees, and it's instant. And you get an instantaneous confirmation as well.
It comes through on the bank with their logo, so you know exactly who that money is going to. Say what you want about government efficiency, but when it comes to taking your money, they figure out the best possible way to do it.
They got to figure it out the fastest possible way. Let's not get confused here about the best way. But I want to go on here for a
Best
second.
by most efficient, but we'll move on.
That's a different discussion for sure. So let's talk. I want to pull on this string here for just a second. We talked about what to do if you haven't filed your return. Get that return filed as quickly as you can. That failure to file penalty applies 5% a month for a maximum of 5 months, or 25% of the tax owed. Now, if you don't owe any taxes, there's no penalties, but don't take the chance. Don't run the risk. All right. Get that return filed, because if you wait too long, you're going to lose your right to a refund or a credit. If you owe money to the IRS and you haven't paid the money in, get it paid in right now as quickly as you can through the direct pay system, as we just talked about. If you can't pay what you owe, then you need to do one or more of a couple of things. The first option is to go on the IRS's website. If you owe less than $50,000 and you can pay within 72 months, you qualify for what's called a streamlined installment agreement, and you can set one of those up on their website. I don't know whether that function is operating right now. My guess is it is, because it's automated. It's based simply on the arithmetic. Here's what I owe. Here's how much I can pay. I can pay within 72 months. And so that gets set up almost automatically. If you owe more than $50,000, it becomes a little bit of a trick. The other way to do it is through the Get IRS Form 9465, Form 9465, and mail that into the IRS at the address and the instructions for the form, and that will set the wheels in motion to get you set up on an installment agreement. Now, the problem with that, of course, right now is that form is not going to be processed. That wouldn't stop me from sending it in just to get the wheels in motion, to evidence that you're acting in good faith and doing the things you know you should do to get this situation under control.
How long after the government reopens do you think that the IRS is going to start trucking through some of this late stuff? But that's what they prioritize, getting out those notices and those liens and those levies, isn't it?
The automated functions of the IRS are still going on. That depends on how long they're shut down. The longer they're shut down, the bigger the pile of backlog mail they're going to have. No question about that. We saw this during COVID when the IRS shut down for about 8 weeks, but all functions of the IRS were shut down during during that period. The mail piled up to the tune of about 30 million tax returns that were unprocessed and untold millions of letters. They were speculating that there was 20 to 25 million incoming letters from taxpayers that were unprocessed because nobody was working. We got a staff working now, and I wouldn't even call it a skeleton staff because about half the number of employees that were on the payroll on September 29th are working in the IRS right now. A lot of the functions are continuing to operate, including the automated functions. So it depends on how big the backlog gets. But normally, under normal circumstances, if you send in that request for an installment agreement, it takes the IRS about 2 to 3 months to respond saying either your agreement is approved, depending on how much you owe and how much you're promising to pay every month, and depending on what information, if any, the IRS needs from you. So it's generally about 2 to 3 months before you get that response that says you're either approved or we need more information. So under these circumstances, who knows? And it may be, Josh, that this staff that's receiving mail, they sort through mail looking for checks, right? They're doing that right now. It may be that they will process installment agreement requests as well. It's very possible.
So the IRS has sent home about half their people, and Trump's got an order out that's firing more people during the shutdown, and that's laying them off and not just sending them home. But there's a judge out there that's trying to say you're not allowed to fire people while the government's shut down.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The IRS sent home about half their workers because of the shutdown. All right. So what Trump has done is he's now come behind that and said, okay, we're furloughing workers. We're not just sending them home because we don't have money. We're laying them off. They don't have a job anymore. And earlier this week, the Office of Management and Budget sent home about 1,500 additional IRS employees and said, you're just laid off, furloughed. It's not just a matter of go home and when we get the money, you're coming back. They lost their jobs. This has happened throughout federal government agencies, and I can't give you the numbers for the other agencies. The IRS is about 1,500.
So it's up and down the list of every alphabet soup agency you can think of.
They say there's more than 4,100 workers across all the government agencies that have been sent home. About 1,500 of those were from the IRS. Labor unions, right? All these various federal employees are represented by labor unions. For IRS workers, it's the National Treasury Employees Union. A number of these unions sued the United States government in a federal court in San Francisco, and they alleged that the layoffs are illegal. And so this federal judge in San Francisco issued a temporary restraining order against the Trump administration prohibiting any further layoffs and arguing that the administration has no authority to do this. All right. You're not going to get to the merits with me today because the merits are troublesome, this judge said in response to a federal U.S. attorney's argument. And she says this is really disturbing. She says these programs firing people are disturbing, and she's arguing that it was illegal, and just sided with the unions saying this is illegal. Okay, that's fine.
Well, let me ask a question about this. Let me interject a thought here. Far be it from me to argue legality and law specifics with a judge, but doesn't it seem like the commander-in-chief, the head of the executive branch, has executive authority to hire and fire the people who work in the executive administration?
Under ordinary circumstances, Josh, I would completely agree with you. It's a misuse of the phrase commander-in-chief. Commander-in-chief refers specifically to military, but the second part of your sentence was exactly correct, and that is that the president is the chief executive officer of the United States government. He is the head of the executive department. He has the ultimate authority over government employees. Here's the wrinkle. These employees are unionized and have contracts. The question is, what does the contract provide? What does the contract allow the federal government to do with respect to employees under these circumstances? This becomes an employer-employee relationship issue addressed under employment law, and it becomes a whole different animal. And that's just way outside of my scope of expertise. But I'll tell you this, the judge is looking at this thing from an emotional standpoint. She says it's the human cost that cannot be tolerated. The human cost of these people losing their jobs and not being able to pay their bills. I empathize with that. I don't want to see anybody unemployed. But the fact of the matter is, Josh, these people are bureaucrats living off of taxpayers to begin with. You don't have a fundamental right to live off the fruits of somebody else's labor. And that's what government employees ultimately do. Now, there's no question about the fact that we need government employees to form the essential elements of government. That's a fact. But there's what are there? 3 million, 3.5 million unelected federal government workers. The United States of America is the largest employer in the United States. They're probably the largest largest employer in the world. At some point, we should be able to have some executive authority to trim that workforce.
Absolutely. First, call up that judge's record and see what her tweets were when people were forced to stay home during COVID. I want to know exactly what the human element of not being able to work was for her at that time, just for clarity. If she maintained the same line, if she thought it was bad to keep people home, then maybe we'll move on from that.
Let me say this, Josh. She is a Clinton appointee. Now, that doesn't automatically make her a leftist judge. Her judicial record, what little bit I know of it, does indicate that she sides quite extensively with labor unions against employers in these kinds of disputes. So it's no surprise to me that she came down on the side of the unions in this particular dispute. But the fact of the matter is she's one judge in one court in one district in the country, and this case is going to be appealed to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And depending on what happens there, regardless of what happens.
She's one judge in one district in one circuit. How does she have the authority to halt an order of chief executive officer, the president of the United States?
That's a good question. You got the balance of power here. The balance of power implies that the powers delegated to the three branches of government can't be abused. One of the branches generally functions as a check and a balance against the other two to prevent abuse. But as we touched on earlier, the chief executive officer of the United States of America that runs the executive branch of government has the authority to control its employees. We would think that's pretty simple. Now you mix in the union problem and you got a whole different discussion there. And that changes the dynamic quite considerably. But to your point, her decision is only going to be temporary in the sense that the Court of Appeals is going to look at it. And regardless of who wins and who loses, the case is going to the Supreme Court. There's just no doubt about that.
Ultimately, it's the Supreme Court who has the right to challenge the things that the president does.
Gosh, my son, I never wanted this for you.
5 years ago, the government decided to shut down society to see how we would function, and the world came to a screeching halt. Now, society decides it's going to shut down the government, and we're not even going to notice. I think that we need to keep this government shut down until people start to actually notice what things are necessary functions of government. And at that point, we can have a rational discussion about what parts of the government to actually read.
It begs the question when you see the IRS's contingency plan, they say, these are the essential functions of the IRS and we need half staff to carry these out. That means the other half are performing unessential functions. Why do we have them in the first place? It certainly begs that question. But the other thing that happened when the government shut down in December of 2018, that shutdown lasted 35 days. Now, how long this one's going to last, we have no idea. Both sides look like they're pretty well dug in. Anything can change at any minute. The last one lasted 35 days. And I remember writing articles about that shutdown when the Treasury Employees Union and other unions of the federal government were screaming and crying about the havoc that it's wreaking on families, and these people need their jobs, and this is so important to get this funded, and we can't have these folks going without. I expressed lack of sympathy for that situation because this is exactly what the IRS does to people routinely that owe money to the agency they can't pay. They execute wage levies, they execute bank levies, they don't ask the question, how are these people going to pay their mortgage payment? How are they going to pay their car payment? How are they going to keep food on the table? They don't ask any of those questions. The burden falls to the citizen to come forward to the IRS, whether it's through the Taxpayer Advocate's Office or some other channel, to try to establish hardship to get the IRS to back off. So it's difficult for me to have sympathy for IRS employees that now no longer an income stream. And my advice is, you know what? Go out and get an honest job.
And that's all we have for today, taxpayers. Thank you for watching. And remember, there's no such thing as a hopeless tax case. If you think yours is the exception, get a hold of Dan here. He can help you see the daylight. Dan, tell them where else they can follow along with your taxpayers' rights crusade.
Absolutely. Follow me on Pillow Talks Taxes. I'm on TikTok, Facebook, True Social, and right here on YouTube with our long form videos. Make sure you subscribe and share these videos, especially share them with your U.S. senators and representative. And if you have a tax problem, go to my website, TaxHelpOnline.com. You buy any book off my website at any price point, you get a free 15-minute consultation directly and personally with me, and I will walk you through your situation.